Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this first international conference organized by the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence Future, devoted to the follow-up of the conference on the future of Europe here at eCampus University. We are very proud of this center by which we are trying with our colleagues here at eCampus and this conference with colleagues from other universities as well, to study what European Union institutions are actually doing to try and implement the proposal coming from the citizens from within the conference on the future of Europe, which was the first experiment of participatory democracy in the European Union, putting together citizens that were selected randomly from all the countries and representative of the European Parliament, the National Parliament, the Commission, and national governments, as well as civil society. So it was a first experiment of participatory democracy, which provided a lot of proposals to improve the functioning and the policies of the European Union. And our center is devoted to study what the member states and European Union institutions are concretely doing to implement those proposals. So it's with this spirit that we start this first international conference. We will have other two within this future project of the Jean Monnet Center in next year and 2025 and in 2026. So this is a short presentation of what we plan to do. In this conference, specifically, we'll focus a lot on the one hand, on the proposal from the Conference on the Future of Europe, and on the other hand, on the way that the European Parliament has tried to translate those proposals into a treaty reform proposal, because not all the proposals coming out of the conference could be implemented within the current legislative framework, because the European Union didn't have the competencies or the power to implement some of those proposals. And therefore, the European Parliament took upon itself to make a comprehensive treaty reform proposal, which started from those Conference of the Future of Europe proposal, but was not really completely coherent with all of them. And so we'll try to analyze in these 2 days how much this European Parliament proposal was a coherent implementation of the Conference on the Future of Europe proposal, and how much the Parliament is studied to shift away and in which direction to be more, to ask for more reform or for less reform, for a more effective Europe and a more democratic Europe, or a less democratic and effective Europe compared to what the citizens have asked. So that's a little bit the purpose of this conference. And I give the floor to our magnificent rector of eCampus University, Professor Enzo Siviero, for his greetings. Thank you, Enzo, so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Roberto. I am very proud and happy to be in contact with you, although I was not able to join you. But anyway, I'm contacting you through online. Therefore, our university is online university, so it's coherent. But I prefer normally to be together with the people, because meeting people is a very important point. We can exchange our point of view. Of course, this is a very, very, very important event that I'm very proud to be rector of this university, which hosts through Roberto Castaldi, who is one of the most valuable professors we have in our university. So, warm welcome to everybody, dear colleagues, dear friends. I hope you will profit so much of being with us. Our campus is quite big with respect to the fact that we are online university, so it's kind of hybrid university. And it's very interesting because this building was IBM European Center. Therefore, there is a kind of ghost in our rooms that we can share with you. This experiment of meeting together in online university is quite peculiar, that we are very proud to. Anyway, coming to your meeting or our meeting, we prefer to share with you also my presence spiritually. I think this is a very important moment now, because the need to change how the organization, the attitude, and the possibility of working of the European Union is something which we consider absolutely very, very important. The tentative to change a little bit the orientation seems to me not enough strong, although our former president Draghi prepared something, as I know yesterday he presented in an unofficial way. But the work of Roberto Castaldi and his group is certainly very important, because I think you are trying to get a better organization, a better efficiency of the European Union. To my experience and to my knowledge, there is a lot of things that needed to be changed. And somehow we have a kind of complexity with a bureaucratic way that need to be simplified. Furthermore, I think that Europe is just dealing with minor changes, minor things, instead of thinking to the wide and future organization. I believe so much in Europe. Me personally, I was engaged in something like 65 years ago in a European party, which was not going on, but with our former foreign minister, Gaetano Martino. He was one of the most important person with Europe we had in our Italy, together, of course, with other so-called father of Europe that I don't mention because everybody knows them. But now, after so many decades, we need to be more pragmatic, more efficient, and having the possibility to decide in a better way as a unified mentality, which is very difficult because, of course, with 27 members and some of them somehow, at least what we feel, are not in favor of Europe as it is, but we needed to convince them that Europe is the future and separation is the past. Only with a unified attitude, a better orientation of the common good will be our future. Europe is a very big country. I consider them one country, and I hope your work, our work, will in the right direction, not to convince, because it's very difficult to convince political people, but anyway, to orient the possibility and showing that it is possible to implement things, maybe even overcoming some negative attitude that we feel in some of our members. Therefore, Italy is a big country, one of the founders, so we need to be more present also in this way. I mean, simplifying, organizing, having a future attitude, and not only the time by time working, which is unfortunately the last period. We were absent, or anyway not so much present in some decisions. It seems sometimes that some other people are deciding and other can follow. I am against any, I would say, 2 or 3 leaders. I think everybody has the right to say something without any consideration about the size, because mentality has no quantitative, it's just qualitative. And the qualitative is much more important than quantitative. Although I understand that the democracy need to have a majority and opposition, as we say. I do not like so much say opposition. I think maybe it was better to say minority. Okay, this is my feeling, and I share with you this welcome. And of course, I hope your result, our result, will be as much as possible. By the way, I am directing as editor of 35 years magazine. This is a scientific magazine, but also more open. The name Galileo, everybody knows Galileo, of course, together with Leonardo da Vinci, is one of the most important, or maybe the most important scientific and technical people we have in Italy. Therefore, I ask Roberto, by the way, to share with me within the next weeks the result, the best result you've got, and I will share all over Italy and outside. You can even write in English because now English is our common language. And I wish you all the best, of course, and thank you so much, Roberto, for this fantastic organization, which I am also a member because I remember the document that you proposed to me, and I'm very happy about that. Thank you so much. Have your time and have your good work in these 2 days. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. I stay with you a few moments, then I have to leave, unfortunately. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you, Professor Siviero, our rector, for his words, but especially for his deeds, for the support that he always showed to our project and to our research center. Our first session, we'll have 6 sections in this conference. We'll have 3 speakers in each of one, and we'll try to bring them together on the basis of a commonality of topics and issues that they will address. So for the first session, we will have Professor Francisco Pereira Coutinho. Francisco, besides being a great friend, he is a professor of European constitutional law at the Universidade Nova de Lisboa. But besides being a great academic, he's also a great European, always involved in pro-European activities, also cooperating with the government currently, with the Portuguese government currently, and also an anchorman at CNN Portugal, trying to explain Europe to the citizen, which is always a difficult task and a task for which we share a common passion. We have been working together on several European projects in the past, and I hope we'll have the chance to do it again in the future. And Francisco will talk about towards a stronger European Union in the world, which is definitely one of the most important challenges in front of the EU, especially at a time where we have a war, and the Russian invasion in Ukraine, war going on in the Middle East, and with the risk of escalation to the whole regional area. And these have a lot to do with the fact that the European Union doesn't have a proper foreign security and defense policy. So I'm really looking forward for Francisco's speech and paper. Thank you so much, Francisco, for joining us today. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Roberto, for the introduction, and especially for the invitation. I would like also to greet the rector of the campus university, who just spoke, Professor Enzo Siviero. It's really a pleasure to be here in situ. It's rather paradoxical. I've been doing a lot of online conferences, and it's really wonderful to come to university. I work a lot online to be at their specific campus, and that is really, really a pleasure, although the day-to-day here in Italy is not very pleasant. But another reason to be here at this conference on this so interesting, important field. I would like also to thank Roberto for the cooperation we've been having for more than a decade now between this university and Nova School of Law in Lisbon, where I work. We've been together in many, many projects, and I think we'll be doing that for the coming years. And those projects, of course, were coordinated by you, by your expertise. We've been developing our own expertise in European projects based on the experiences we've been having with you. So thank you so much, also in the name of my university and colleagues, for inviting us at a moment where we had absolutely no experience with European projects. And now if you go and see our website, we have a lot of them. And that started with your invitation. And thank you so much for inviting us and trusting in our work. together, it's possible to do very interesting things also in the European field, which is something that we all need these days, these difficult days. As you said, we are at war, not directly, indirectly in the Ukraine. And I'm going to speak specifically about the European Common Foreign Security Policy policies. And this is the topic of the conference. The idea is to see what's the follow-up on the conference on the future of Europe, and specifically how the European Parliament internalized the suggestions and proposals that the conference made. And I will basically focus on four of the proposals. And actually, although the EP was criticized for not following many of the proposals, specifically in this field, I do think that the European Parliament actually incorporated the most relevant proposals and measures that stemmed from the conference on the future of Europe, specifically on the field of foreign security and defense domains. And I'm going to focus specifically on four. Of course, in the end of the day, these proposals, even if they are adopted, they're not going to solve the problem, because the problem is systemic, as I will try to explain in the end of my presentation, and regards the fact that we don't have a state in Europe. We do have, I think, a sort of federation, but it's an open federation where member states keep their foreign policy. And this is a big difference, for instance, for the United States when they were established. But of course, they were established in the 18th century, where international relations were actually very, very, very weak. There were not that many relationships between states. That's not the case in the 21st centuries. And I do think member states will never leave this sovereignty in the external field. And so we're always gonna have this systemic problem in the European Union, even if we solve and give the European Union more sovereignty in its external actions. Member states will never, at least I do think they will never accept this idea of a closed federation where the external action will be in the realms exclusively of the European Union. So the only thing we can actually do, Roberto, here is try to find some patchworks to actually solve some of the issues that we currently have within the fields that the European Union already has some powers. So I'm going to focus specifically in four of those domains. The first one, and this is a proposal from the conference, which is absolutely crucial, and we've been seeing this for the last 2.5 years, which is we need to find a way to tackle the paralysis in the decision making of the European Union in the foreign policy specifically. And that goes straight to a proposal that was adopted by the European Parliament, which is basically to adopt decisions by majority regarding sanctions and regarding other foreign policy fields. This is absolutely crucial to enable the Union to tackle the current geopolitical challenges. Absolutely crucial. We cannot remain stuck with unanimity in this specific field. And we've been seeing this every day, especially in the war in Ukraine. We do have a Trojan horse inside the EU right now, which is the Hungary. So every single decision that we have to take in this domain has to go through a way to circumvene the veto that Hungary keeps bringing up, and so this is absolutely necessary. But not only the war in Ukraine, if you go and see the war in Gaza, we also see the same problem, not only because Hungary has also tried to block every single decision, but even because the war in Gaza is even more interesting, because we do see member states' entrenched foreign policy regarding the Middle East reflected in the positions that have taken in the last year. And I'll give you an example, the question of the ceasefire. Right now in Europe, everybody agrees on the ceasefire, but if we go see from October until March, that's when the decision on actually proposing a ceasefire was taken. It was extremely difficult to find a common position, given that at some point the Germans insisted a lot that they were not for ceasefire, they just wanted some humanitarian pauses. So there was this metaphoric discussions on how to get unanimity there, which resembles a lot the discussions that we have in the EU Security Council just to get a single decision. And of course, this is completely impossible to retain in the EU. So we really need majority voting in the specific field, because to actually decide with the spectrum of a veto is completely different than deciding knowing that a veto is not enough to take a decision. Of course, the tension will not evaporate even if we have majority voting decision-making procedure in the external domain, because again, this dual sovereignty will remain in the external action. States will still be sovereign externally, but at least we're going to have decisions taken by the European Union, and we will not see the problem of an Hungarian veto spectrum all the time whenever we are taking decisions. So this is the first proposal that stems from the conference. It was taken by the European Parliament. The second, I think, interesting aspect of the proposal from the Parliament is to bring into the objectives of the EU external action this idea of strategic autonomy. It's there for the first time. So, but it's a very interesting concept because it goes straight to what Macron has been trying to preach in the last few years, which is an external action from the European Union, which has its own objectives vis-a-vis the United States. And he keeps talking about this idea of bringing European sovereignty and goes straight to this idea of strategic autonomy. And how does that reflect on the proposals from the European Parliament? The first one, and this is an old discussion I've been having with Roberto, is the idea of creating a defense union in the EU. It's a very old discussion. We were having, I remember having this discussion in Pisa 10 years ago, and he was saying, no, we need the European Army, we need European defense. And it was not very clear back then, but right now it's very clear. And that's reflected also in the treaty, having a permanent standing military units, which will be, of course, an embryo for an European army. Of course, we're going to have an European army only when we have unanimity between the member states, but we are getting closer right now because with the war in Ukraine, we have right now only 2 neutral states, which are Austria and Ireland. So we reduced those to half. So the situation is much more easier to actually go forward with the creation of a defense union and perhaps an European army. And that's absolutely crucial for this idea of strategic autonomy. But of course, this is very problematic. For instance, for my country, Portugal, this is the perfect nightmare for us, because you need to see where we are in the map and our history, and we are an Atlantic country by default. We are not an European country. Actually, we became European after we lost the colonies, after we had to decolonize, and then we had this decision to come into the European Union, but we were a founding member of NATO, even when we were a dictatorship. So for us, our DNA is an Atlantic country, halfway between the European Union and the United States. So this idea of strategic autonomy of a schism with the United States, it's going to create a big problem for Portugal at some point, where we might have to decide where we stay in the European Union or we try to find some kind of political union with the UK, who is outside the Union by the way, and with the United States. And if you go and see our history, our whole history was a history of alliances with the hegemonic Atlantic power. First the UK, then the United States. So this idea of strategic autonomy, I do think it's absolutely crucial for the European Union, but it will create some geopolitical tensions for my home country, Portugal, for good reasons, because it will make us decide exactly what our DNA, exactly what we want for the future. Do we want to become a full-fledged European country? And of course, why we're never a European country? Because this is the way we're basically independent from Spain. It was the only reason we're independent from Spain. If you go and see, there are not natural borders between Portugal and Spain, and we became independent because we basically look ourselves for the Atlantic, never to Europe. But of course, things have changed dramatically, and this idea of strategic autonomy and this future without the United States is absolutely crucial to understand where we'll go forward from here. Also in this field, really interesting in the proposal from the parliament is that we have some light tweaks to the defense clause, which is also interesting because right now we have a defense clause which is really not a defense clause, but if you go and see the proposal from the parliament, they're going to replicate very, very close Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. Of course, it still talks about the policies of neutrality of some member states, but this is the right way forward. Again, very close to this idea of strategic autonomy. So this is the second proposal that I think is very interesting. Also stemming from the Conference on the Future of Europe is this idea that we need to strengthen the role of the High Representative, and we need to have the European Union talking with one voice. And again, this is a field where we do see some developments in the proposals that are stemming from the European Parliament. What we have new names, but we already had new names in the Constitutional Treaty. We're going to bring back that idea of having the big political institutions in the European Union actually reflecting this idea that the European Union should have a president, only one president, not two presidents, and a secretary, a sort of Ministry for Foreign Affairs. But the big development here, where I do see and very important and good development, is this idea that we're going to scrap the current schizophrenia that we see in the external relations of the European Union, which is to have this bicephaly in the representation of the European Union between the President of the Council and the President of the Commission. We got the idea of Parliament. We're going to have only one figure, and that's really important because we saw what happened in Turkey with the question of the seats, and that's extremely harmful for the way that the European Union is actually observed from the outside, especially when we do have a president of the council who wants, like Jacques Michel wanted, to actually exercise his external actions role, and he did. I don't think the new president of the council, which is Antonio Costa, Portuguese, will do that. He's much more an insider. I don't see him touring the world trying to represent the European Union as Michel did. So I don't think there will be that tension as we had in the past 5 years between von der Leyen and Michel, probably. But that will never solve the problem, because if we do have a president of the European Council with that kind of profile, problems will arise. So this is absolutely crucial. The idea that we need the European Union to talk only with one voice when representing the Union is something that I think this institutional change will solve. Of course, the conference speaks with one of its proposals on the need to reinforce the role of the High Representative. But if you go and see the proposals, the only change is the name. And if you change the name and if you don't change the powers, there will be no substantive change specifically there. Finally, my last point, which is, I think it's also interesting that we also see in the proposals of reform of the treaties that were approved by the European Parliament that reflect the measures proposed by the Conference on the Future of Europe, regards one last point, which I would title this idea of democratization of EU external relations. So basically, what we have in the proposals from the European Parliament, without any surprise, is an European Parliament and supranational institutions with a lot of more skin in the game when it regards every aspect of EU external relations. Because right now, we don't see the Court of Justice with full jurisdiction in this field. So if we go and see the proposals, the Court of Justice gets full jurisdiction in this field. And this is incredibly important because in the strict fields where the court actually could have a say, it was really influential in the past few decades. So if we enlarge the jurisdiction of the court, we're going to see a lot more decisions by the Court of Justice, which are going to have a real impact on EU external relations. And the other aspects, and this is, of course, something we have seen every time we have a treaty amendment since the 50s, which is an increased enlargement of the powers of the European Parliament. That's going to happen in any treaty proposal. It happened every time, otherwise the Parliament will not accept it. And we see that specifically, and that's really important when we go and see, for instance, and this is very important, the procedure for Ius Tractandi, so international agreements procedure. We see it's very technical, but it's really, really, really important. For instance, right now, whenever we have the opening of negotiations regarding a new commercial treaty between the European Union and other member states, this has to go exclusively through the Council, and the mandate for the negotiations goes exclusively through the Council. So if you go and see the proposal right now, we see the European Parliament also having a say specifically there, and that's crucial because that's where basically the scope of the negotiations. And of course, this is probably the most important the most important field where the European Union right now has exclusive competences. And of course, we need to have the European Parliament there, because right now what we have is an intervention from the European Parliament way late, and sometimes this basically procrastinates the conclusions of the agreements. It creates a lot of issues with third states because they thought it was negotiating with the European Union based on this, specific mandate that they thought the European Union really wanted. But then we see that the European Union don't want that, because when the Parliament comes to approve that treaty, they say no, we don't want this, we want something different. And of course, this is completely crazy for the third state negotiations, because they don't understand exactly what are those people actually negotiating about, because they don't have the mandates to go forward in the end. And finally, also important, we also see the European Parliament having a say on defense policy specifically, and this is going to be crucial in the future. And we already have seen some instruments right now, because we had to create them within the war in Ukraine to finance the Ukrainian war effort through EU funding. So we're going to see the European Parliament also having an important say on the financing of procurement and development of armaments. And this is something that, of course, we've been seeing right now through ad hoc, the peace facility, which were created for other reasons, but are apparently right now being used on the war of Ukraine. So these four specific proposals for me are the most interesting and challenging, and I think they are all good proposals from the European Parliament. You could say that the conference was more ambitious, perhaps, than what was reflected by the European Parliament. But even there is really this is the nuclear issues that were identified, and they are tackled by the European Parliament, and I think they do reflect most of the ideas that were brought up by the Conference on the Future of Europe. But again, in the end, this will never solve the biggest issue right now, which would be to give the European Union and exclusively of the European relationships with the world. So if you want a strong EU in the world, then you have to have the European Union not only on trade and specific fields, but in every single field, having being the only relevant actor, and not the member states. So this idea of an open federation, constitutional open federation, where member states retain their external sovereignty, it will always create problems in the EU external relations. Always, it's systemic. It's impossible to solve. But of course, that would mean that member states will have to to have to accept losing that external sovereignty, external relationships, and that's something that I don't see in the future. Although if they do, because there is this myth that if they lose that power, there will no longer be sovereign states, because the external sovereignty is this mark of sovereignty that states cannot lose in any circumstance. And that's not technically, that's not true. And the same goes for creating a European army. It doesn't dent the idea of sovereignty of states, because of course this the idea of sovereignty that we have in the European Union, this concept is very problematic whenever we use it to explain our current situation, but it's used especially in some specific areas of the political spectrum to actually attack the European Union. But really, this is in the external action domain, the most problematic issue that we're going to have every time we're going to discuss treaty amendments in this field. But of course, all these proposals, they're good, they're internal, they are basically related to the way that we currently decide on these matters, on how we have the European Union represented in the world. And I think just to finish, to answer my question, are we going to have a stronger EU in the world with this if we adopt these proposals from the European Parliament? Well, yeah, certainly they will not hurt, but it will be we will be stronger. I think so, but that will not give us the leeway to actually be a strong institutional and actor in the world, if we keep having member states with their autonomous external policy. That will always be a problem. And if we want a strong EU in the world, we have to scrap that. That's not going to happen. So every amendment that we do in these fields will be only incremental and will tackle some of the problems that we have right now, but not the real problem, which is to have a weak EU in the world, which stems specifically from the fact that we still have some strong member states in the world, especially the big ones. So this is, in a nutshell, what I would like to say regarding this specific field of the EU foreign and security policy. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you so much, Francisco, for this enlightening presentation. I'm sure that we will have the chance in the debate to come back on this big issue regarding the EU role in the world, its foreign and security policy, and the transformation it needs. This is one of the priority of the conference, and as future, we are deciding the international conference. We are doing a number of smaller events in Italian around Italy and producing some policy papers. And we did work specifically on the issue of the defense union, and we published a series of policy paper in a series of short articles thanks to our media partnership with Euractiv, which turned into a special report of Euractiv on European defense. And I think this will be helpful in the debate because we try there to address the issue of how to create a European defense, knowing that it won't be an exclusive competence, because that's at the end the issue. In most federal system, defense is an exclusive competence, while we have to build a European Defense Union, knowing that this will be a concurrent competence and not an exclusive one. And this is the challenge indeed. So thank you so much for this enlightening presentation, Francisco. And I will give the floor to Erion Hitai. He is a researcher in international European law here at Campus University. He was director of the Department of Law at Universitat Ismail Kemal in Vlora in Albania before joining us at Campus. It's already open here. So thank you so much, Erion, who will speak about climate change and environment protection between the Conference on the Future of Europe and European Parliament Treaty Reform Proposal. We have put this together in this session regarding Europe's role in the world because climate change and environmental protection is something that you do inside, but while you are doing inside, you are also setting away the rules for the rest of the world. when we think about the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And also the EU has been pushing at the international level within the various COPs in order to increase and strengthen climate change and environmental protection at the global level. So paradoxically, this is one of the few fields in which citizens recognize that the EU has an international role, and this is why we decided that this issue should go together with Europe in the world, because this is one of the issues where we have some form of international role of the European Union. So, Erion, thank you so much for being with us today. You have the floor.
Thank you, Roberto, for the invitation, and special congratulations to you and your team, the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence Future, for organizing this very interesting conference on the follow-up of the conference on the future of Europe, which held its workings during from April 21 to May 22, over in terms of internal or separate and plenary sessions, dealing with 10 main topics, which were the focus of this conference. The most representatives of which were climate change and environment protection, health issues, stronger economy, social justice, and jobs, the role of the EU in the world, as the colleague Pereira Coutinho already enlightened us with his position and the newest in the issue, values and rights, rule of law and security issues, as well as digital transformation, European democracy, migration issues, education, culture, youth and sport, and other ideas. The third panel of 4 dealt with the exclusive issue of climate change and environment. This is a very delicate and very fragile issue, not only for the institution, but mostly, as Roberto underlined, for the citizens. More than 5 million of citizens were consulted online during the workings of the conference, of the separate sessions of the conference, and they brought some concrete proposals to the third panel in order to achieve and to deal with the 5 mainstreams of the issue, which is the better ways of living, the protection of environment and health, the right direction of the economy and consumption, the realization of the sustainable society, and the goal of caring for all the citizens of the Union. In the larger context of the EU objectives and strategies on effects of the climate change and on agriculture, transport, and mobility, as well the transition to post-carbon societies. We have a very, very problematic issue today with the energetic transition as a source of energy in the European Union, from the old carbon-based economy to a renewable energy-based economy. And during the workings of this third panel, 6 objectives were at the topic, at the attention of the participants. The first objective regarded safe, sustainable, just, climate responsible, affordable production of food, respecting sustainability principles, the environment, safeguarding the biodiversity and ecosystems, and ensuring food security. And concrete proposals were advanced at the outcome of the conference in order to provide for a green and blue economy, to reorganize and redirect subsidies and strengthen incentives towards organic farming, concrete proposal on applying circular economy principles in agriculture, and measures against food waste, which is also very sensitive to the European economy, research and innovations, including technological solution for sustainable production, plant resistance, and precision farming, recent breeding and meat production with a focus on animal welfare and sustainability using clear labeling, for example, measures and high standard and common norms for animal farming. Significant reduce of use of chemical pesticides and fertilizers, and more rules and concrete rules for the use of plastic in agriculture and ways to reduce water consumption in agriculture. Another objective regarding the protection and restoration of biodiversity, the landscape and the oceans, in order to eliminate pollution, with the concrete proposal to create, to restore, and better manage the protected areas for the conservation of biodiversity. Reward system to tackle pollution, applying the polluter pays principles. Also support reforestation, including forest loss by fire, enforcement of responsible forest management, and better use of wood replacing other materials, as well as to enhance the role of municipalities and to grant them more competence in urban planning and construction of new buildings supporting blue-green infrastructure. Another objective regards the enhancing of European energy security. And this is very, very crucial. In a time of international crisis in Ukraine and in the Middle East region, the transition of the European Union from a carbon-based economy to a renewable-based energy is very, very current, because of the emergencies of climate change and environment protection. And there were made some concrete proposal in order to speed up with the green transition, asking for more investments in renewable energy, which is the most ambitious goal of European Union in climate change, in order to become, as Roberto said, a global green economy leader, and fully implement the dispositions of the Paris Climate Agreement. To reduce, in a second order, dependencies from oil and gas imports through energy efficiency projects, to support for affordable and renewable public transport, to high-speed rail and freight network, and to the expansion of the clean and renewable energy provision. The fourth objective of 6 of them deals with the provision of high-quality, modern, green, and safe infrastructure in the name of connectivity of rural and island regions, in particular through affordable public transport. And concrete proposals were made in order to support public transport and develop a European public transportation network, especially in rural and island regions, to invest in high-speed and night trains, to develop high-speed internet and mobile network connectivity in rural and island regions, requiring urban development programs for greener cities, to improve infrastructure for cycling, to improve existing transportation infrastructure from an ecological point of view. The last objective, the fifth one, deals with the enhancement of the use of and management of materials within the EU in order to become more circular, more autonomous, and less dependent. To build a circular economy by promoting sustainable EU products and production, to ensure all products placed in the EU market, in the common market, comply with the EU environmental standards, and stricter in this way, harmonize production standards within the EU and a transparent labeling system. Phase out non-sustainable form of packaging, regulate environmentally safe packaging, and avoid wasting of material in packaging. Also introduce EU-wide packaging deposit return scheme and advanced standards for containers. Also proposed to the EU to take actions that enable and incentivize consumers to use products longer. Also to increase the environmental standards and enforce compliance related to export of waste, both within the EU and to the third countries. And the last objective, which deals with the education and fostering knowledge, awareness, and dialogues on environment, climate change, energy use, and sustainability. Through a series of proposals which cover the creation and interactive fact-checked information platform, support information campaigns on eco-awareness, development by the European Union with assistance of member states of a common European Charter on environmental issues, and fostering environmental awareness among all citizens. To include also in these proposals the food production and biodiversity protection as part of education, to strengthen the role and the action of the EU in the area of environmental education. So these were the mainly the six objectives set out in the outcome of the conference for the future of Europe at the end of the plenary session, the last plenary session of May 22. At this point, the European Parliament, which was called to propose its amendments in order to achieve the goals and the objectives set up in the conference, on November 2023, approved a proposal for a treaty amendment. You know, there is a very strict procedure on the treaty amendment of the EU, of the current treaties, as Francisco underlined previously. States are not at favor of, for example, losing some sovereign powers in terms of internal competencies and in terms of foreign policies at the benefit of the European Union. Because of this hybrid situation of the European Union, the Parliament took a stronger position towards a very important amendment of the treaties. Among others, in the issues of the climate change, the European Parliament asked for the establishment of exclusive union competence for environment and biodiversity, as well as negotiations on climate change. So the treaties should give to the Commission and to the European Union as an exclusive competence the right to negotiate on climate change treaties, international treaties. Also, these amendments should aim the reduction of global warming and safeguarding biodiversity to be included as aims of the Union. The Parliament suggests also to add climate and biodiversity protection to the Union's Sustainable Development Goals. The Parliament calls for the Union to protect the natural foundations of life and animals, in line with the One Health approach, as well as to take account of the risk of crossing planetary boundaries. Calls also the European Parliament for international obligations of the Union to pursue efforts to limit the global temperature increase to be incorporated into the treaties. In terms of energy policy, the European Parliament asked and called for the creation of an integrated European Energy Union. This system must be affordable and based on energy efficiency, renewable energies, and in conformity with international agreements to mitigate climate change. Which were the concrete articles of the treaties called to be amended by the European Parliament? The Article 3, Paragraph 3, and Subparagraph 1 of the Treaty of the European Union was proposed to get amended by adding the phrase on the internal market competence of the European Union, by including also the reducing of global warming and safeguarding biodiversity in line with international agreements. So one of the goals of the sustainable development policy of the European Union should be in the future also goals to the reducing global warming and safeguarding biodiversity in line with these international agreements. Article 3, paragraph 2 also proposed a new text. And this is very, very important because we are in the context of the Treaty of the European Union, which is the treaty where the competencies are exclusively to the Union and the member states. The Union shall also have exclusive competence for the conclusion of international agreement, including in the context of global negotiation on climate change. So this is a very, very strict condition imposed in the proposals by the European Union, by the European Parliament, which will concretely give to the European Union a clear competence in the external dimension on negotiations on on climate change treaties, not only to the member states, but also to the European Union itself. While Article 191 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, paragraph 1, a new text was proposed by the European Parliament while promoting measures at Union and international level. The existing one is measures at international level to deal with regional or worldwide environmental problems by protecting biodiversity and implementing the Union's international obligation. So within the discipline, the competencies of the Union, the point of reference should be made to the protecting the biodiversity and international obligations of the European Union. While Article 194, paragraph 1, which the European Parliament proposed to add a new paragraph, which would consent to the European Union to design the overall energy system in line with international agreements to mitigate climate change. These positions of the European Parliament are really stronger than the conclusions of the Conference for the Future of Europe. And it is a task for the other institution. It is the task for the European Council to, along with other proposals set up by the Parliament in order to, as Francisco said, also to completely modify the voting procedures and the majority rules within the European Union, also to include the issue of climate change and environment protection in the future new dispositions of the EU treaties. And you can see that there is an ambiguity and duality between the point of view from one side of the citizens of Europe and the European Parliament from one side, and sovereign pretensions of member states from the other side, which means that in some cases, member states would never take off competencies that they already own by treaties. And the abandon of this kind of climate change sovereignty on the treaties will be the challenge of the future for the EU institution and for the new convention for the amendment of the treaties, which is expected to start in the next years. And which is the most critical issue of concern is the energetic independence from traditional suppliers. It was already mentioned from the colleague in the previous speech that some countries pretend and resist to deliver internal competencies, mostly even in the field of energetic independence. Hungary, as said by Francisco, is not opposing the EU initiatives in an external dimension, but also in an internal one. Internal policies, mostly in the case of energetic independence. while they are dependent on the Russian and other countries' furnitures of oil and gas, they would hardly accept total independence from these, according to them, cheap and easy energy coming from the East. But since the economy and the rules of the economic development of the European Union and the achievement of the goals of internal market ask and call for a reduce of dependence from external actors and the transition to a new renewable energy-based economy, I think the challenge of the future of the new convention on the amendments of the treaties will focus on this idea of total closure to the ties with the old and traditional suppliers of energy for the European Union countries. And the final dilemma, which is a dilemma of two positions: more expensive but new green economy, or a step-by-step and prudent economic growth and energetic transition. We have seen that mostly after the energetic crisis, the military crisis in Ukraine, and the prices of energy getting higher and higher, there is also a position within the European Union of what to do with daily increasing prices of the energy, which is converted into cost for the citizens. And so the idea of abandoning the traditional source of energy in favor of new green economy will be the dilemma of the next years on the future of the European Union for what regards strictly with the climate change and environmental protection.
Thank you so much, Herion, for this wonderful presentation. It was very clear in comparing both the proposal from the conference and those from the parliament, while highlighting also the difficulties that we're going to face regarding implementing those proposals of the citizens and of the European Parliament. So thank you so much, and I'll now give the floor to Federica Martini, who teaches philosophy of law at the University of Pisa and presents a paper, Ulysses and the Silence Again, which is a clear reference to Altiero Spinelli as well, who used to, in his autobiography, Ulysses as his name, also because in Ventotene, when they wrote the Ventotene Manifesto, they had other name that they used. In that case, it was Pantagruel for Spinelli, but then for the autobiography is entitled Myself, Ulysses, and here we have a clear reference from Federica that also clarify her point of view and perspective on the issue. So Federica, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Thank you all. I'll try to find, first of all, the presentation. Maybe it should be, yeah, that's it. Yes, perfect. My presentation will be a bit strange compared to the main topic of the conference. Of course, all of the speakers and of course, all of the persons involved in the future project are pro-Europeans, and in their working life tries to highlight the potentiality and the positivity of the challenges that the EU has to face. But what I'm going to do today, despite I am a pro-European person and a federalist as well, I will try to give you like a philosophical insight of the dark side of European democracy. Because of course the Conference of the Future of Europe was a big challenge, a big experiment, but it has a clear dark side from a pro-European and federalist perspective, which is actually the fact that it is in Western liberal democracy, it is always a mistake not to take into account the voice of citizens. And so the fact that it is somehow difficult to imagine how the voices of the European citizens will be taken into account, it's something that is quite problematic. So that's why I will talk you about a strange topic which comes from mythology, so from the Odyssey and the famous episode of Ulysses and the Sirens. I'm sure all of you knows basically the background and the mythological framework. The basic idea is that it was used in not only in literature, but also in political philosophy literature, constitutional law literature, and law literature itself as a metaphor of the limits of the constitutions. So the limits that a constitution gives itself against, let's say, populist and populist challenges. Okay, so the idea basically is that Ulysses, it was the king of Ithaca, trying to go back home after the Trojan War, as you know, tied to the mast of the ship to listen to the songs of the sirens. The point is that old man, his companion, on the other side, were continuous sailing with a wax in their ears, so they were unable to listen to the sirens' voices, and this will guarantee the safe sailing of the ship. Why this is a metaphor? It is a metaphor of the theme of the limits of democracy, because it is a metaphor of the way we can prevent ourselves to do something that rationally it is absolutely negative for us. But why does Ulysses want to listen to the siren songs? So why he didn't put a wax into his own ears as well as his companions? And it was just for curiosity. It was just for he wanted to know. So the siren songs were supposed to give the knowledge. Or there is a problem also of the idea that those who have the power have some way have to listen to what happens in concrete life in reality. Basically, this is the framework of the first questions. In the first interpretation of this episode, the big metaphor is the idea of seduction. So here I choose quite strong image, I know, but it was like the metaphor of the seduction of the sirens, the seduction of populism and dangerous things for democracy, let's say. So according to the main interpretation that was given to this episode, the idea is that we can identify the siren's voice bewitching and bringing disaster. So the idea of the mythological topic was that the ships were going to a disaster, and all the people on the ships were going to die. So the way listening to the siren's voice was dealing with death. And the way not to listen to the sirens was the only way to save their lives, basically. The voices of mythological creators is a metaphor of the promise to simple solutions to complex problems, and to the threat to democracy itself, in a way. What is so attractive about them, and why can't the man in charge of controlling the firmness of the ropes that bind Ulysses to the tree of the ship, which are metaphor of the limits of the Constitution, listen to those voices? Well, a masterpiece in literature, in philosophical literature, is Jon Esther, Ulysses and the Sirens, Studies in Rationality and Irrationality. It was a very famous book published in 1979. And in this book, Elster advances the proposal to consider rationality as something that is connected with the temporal dimension. So a strategy is assumed to be completely rational if it is chosen in the present moment, taking account the future possibility, so to leave no room for the phenomenon of regret. Today, I'm trying to find a rational solution, trying to imagine which will be the challenges and the problems in a potential future situation. It is a quite complicated definition, because according to Elster, a strategy is assumed to be completely rational only if there is the theoretical premises that human beings have temporal preferences, but these temporal preferences are completely irrational and immoral. So in his analysis, Ulysses is a perfect rational decision maker, and the idea to listen to the sirens being immobilized is the stereotype of rational solution. Okay. I'm not completely convinced by Elster's interpretation, so I will try to give you some other possible interpretations of these myths. So one of these possible interpretations focuses not on the enchanting sounds of the sirens, but on Ulysses' decision not to listen to them. So in the sense of the importance of not taking the listening seriously as a political decision in democracy, in times of democracy. So the act of getting tidied up in this case can be seen as a metaphor for not taking what is being listened to seriously. So the idea that policymakers and politicians cannot take seriously the voices of citizens. The idea that the voices of citizens are important only on the election days, and then no matter what the public opinion says, they are seen like, the voices of the sirens, always dangerous and always something to can be a danger for democracy. So authentic listening is something that presupposes the possibility of changes one point of view. If I'm really, truly listening to you, I have to take into account the chance of change my mind. If I'm truly listening. Otherwise, I'm just hearing without listening profoundly. So this critical suggestion came from another literature text which is A Man of Two Faces, Memoir, a History, a Memorial, by the Pulitzer Prize winner Viet Thanh Nguyen. I don't know how to pronounce it. In his diary, it is a novel, but also a political text in a way. He says basically that it is those who refuse to listen who dehumanize others by silencing them, not listening to them, or hearing only what they want to hear. So the powerful, the men who have the power, are the smallest minority in a democratic framework. And they exalt the single voice because they don't want to hear the chorus of those who do not have the power, who are the largest of majority in democracy. So in his idea, those who have the power want to deal with you individually and not as a group, because the voices of people as a group has power. So this is a different interpretation we can have. The most famous interpretation maybe of this myth was given by Horkheimer and Adorno in their dialectics of the Enlightenment. In this book, they reveal, let's say, the other side of the coin. So the idea that the Homeric hero's freedom is a sort of a privileged situation. So the privilege of listening to the Song of the Sirens without being annihilated is connected with the asymmetrical position of his men, of his companions, who does not have this possibility. What we usually forget about this famous episode is actually that in the Homeric narrative, Odysseus openly confronts with his companion about this problem. So it seems that they agree to put the wax in their earrings and to let Ulysses free of these means. So it seems that all the companions agree that only Ulysses was in charge of listening to Sirens' song. Anyway, what this metaphor of mythology can say about the Conference of the Future of Europe? The Conference of the Future of Europe, as you perfectly know, was an experiment of deliberative democracy, and it has a lot of limitation, of course, but it was the very first experiment of deliberative democracy in the European democracy history, basically. So the final report was including 49 proposals with more than 300 measures adopted by the conference plenary on the 30th of April. And it was presented at this event. Sorry, the photo is not very clear. But this was the closing event of the conference on the 9th of May, so Europe Day in Strasbourg. And you can see, of course, in the picture, President von der Leyen, President Roberta Metsola, French President Emmanuel Macron, who was the first one who actually launched for the first time the idea of the citizens' debate about the future of Europe. And all those important persons were acknowledged that some of the most ambiguous proposals would require EU treaties changes and EU treaties reform. So it was an official ceremony of the closing working of the conference. And Roberta Metsola, Ursula von der Leyen, Emmanuel Macron openly said that it has been a big event, a big experiment, that the voice of European citizens was so very clear that the EU institutions should have taken into account it seriously in treaties reform. Okay, very good. The problem was that the same day, it was exactly the same 9th of May of that year, a joint non-paper came out. It was signed by 13 member states, basically from Eastern Europe and North Europe, and 13 member states is quite a large number. And in this non-paper, it was said it was absolutely ill-considered attempts to speak about treaty reforms and treaty changes. It is symbolically important into my perspective that the two things occurred on this very same day. So the Conference of the Future of Europe was an attempt to involve European citizens in the construction and in the shaping of European Union future. But it seems that some of the decision makers in the EU and some of the decision makers in some member states were still not ready to take into account to citizens' voice, actually. So this is I think it is always a mistake in liberal democracy system not to account to the voices of citizens where when it is expressed with organized, profound and free debate. But it is specifically a mistake in the context of European institutions, because European institutions are pointed out as distant from the point of view of normal citizens, distant from citizenship, and basically governed by technocrats and bureaucrats, experts basically, rather than by men and women with a political vision. I don't want to say this is a true position or not, but this is what mainly in the mainstream is the basic messages about the EU democracy and how the decisions are taken in the EU framework. So we all know that when we speak about the EU democratic deficit, it is not about this, but it is about the way decisions are making. It is connected with what you just mentioned. So the unanimity, decision-making point, and the veto power that often paralyze important and crucial decisions. But even if we are aware of it, we have to take into account the mainstream position of the citizens who sees the European Union as a distant entity. And so it is, according to me, a very mistake not to consider properly the voices of the European citizens, as it pointed out in the final document of the Conference of the Future of Europe. So finally, I have just a provocative question. Let's try to put together the idea of the mythological metaphor and what we know about this concrete experiment of deliberative democracy. So, what are really the voices of the sirens? They are the voices of populist vision, or the sirens are rather the voices of some member states and political makers who are afraid of losing power, and so who don't want to listen to the voice of, democratically, the voice of European citizens? that.
Thank you, Federica, for this great speech, very inspiring with this reference to mythology and the issue of democracy that is behind the whole work that the future Jean Monnet Center of Excellence is doing. Because you mentioned one of the big issue, and it's interesting because it overlaps with the closure of Erion's speech about the prospect of a convention. And it's true that the member states are currently violating the treaties, essentially, because Article 48 of the Treaty of European Union provides the European Parliament, the Commission, and any member state with the power to propose a formal amendment to the treaty. And in this case, the Council is supposed to transmit the proposal to the European Council, which decide by simple majority on the opening of a treaty reform. Now, the European Parliament has approved a general proposal treaty reform that touches a huge number of articles, both of the Treaty of the European Union and the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. On the November 23rd, the Council in December transmitted the proposal to the European Council. Now, 8 months have passed. There were 4 meetings of the European Council, and it was never put on the agenda the issue of opening a treaty reform. This is clearly a violation of the treaty, and there is a debate regarding this on the fact that the treaty doesn't fix a deadline by which the European Council is supposed to take a decision. At the same time, when we discuss about the legislative procedure, there is a time limit by which European institutions are supposed to take a decision, and there is no reason to believe that on treaty reform they can take any time they want. And there is the principle of loyal cooperation between European institutions and between European Union and member states. So if the Council was not considered to be violating directly the letter of Article 48, it's certainly violating the spirit of Article 48, as well as the article relating to the principle of loyal cooperation between institutions. So, of course, this issue is very much at the core of Federica's point, and is one of the crucial political issues that we'll see in this beginning of the new European legislature. It was interesting that Ursula von der Leyen, in her speech, when she asked for the Parliament to vote her in as a President of the European Commission, clearly spoke of the European Parliament treaty reform proposal and said that she was in favor of opening a convention to reform the treaty. So we'll see when we'll have both the Parliament and the Commission on board, if this will eventually convince the European Council, that is the member states' government, to follow the law, to respect the treaty, and to take a decision on the opening of a convention. As it is clear that the number and the significance of the amendment proposed by the Parliament would never allow for a simplified treaty procedure, which can be used only if the reform is not very significant. This certainly is not the case with the Parliament. So thank you so much, Federica. We can open the debate. So the floor is open both for the people connected online and for the people here in the room. For those online, I would kindly ask you to raise your hands so that we can see if there is somebody who wants to speak, and we can give them the floor and accordingly. So this is for those who are connected online, as coherently with the online nature of eCampus. All our events are always either online or in a hybrid form like this conference. So if you want to speak, for those connected, you need to raise your hand so that I can give you the floor. And in the meantime, we'll start here from the room. And in order to break the ice, I would like to ask a few questions to each of our first speaker of this session. I'll go in following the same order for Francisco. You raised the issue about the need to overcome unanimity for foreign security policy. That was a request of the conference and a request in the parliament. But how do we overcome the need for unanimity to overcome unanimity? Because both through a treaty reform or through the passerelle clause, which can be used for foreign policy, not for security and defense policy, we need unanimity to decide to move to qualified majority voting. The second question for Francisco is about, you mentioned that changing the name won't be enough. What do you think about von der Leyen proposal to have a commissioner for defense? What do you think can be the contour of this new institutional figure that we never had in the past? And is this going just to create new expectation that cannot be fulfilled? Like when in 1992 with the Maastricht Treaty, we created the European Union and we said we will have a common foreign security policy, but we didn't have even the High Representative at the time. There was the Yugoslav wars and the European Union was completely unable to take any common position. It was, but didn't we have, haven't we just created a common foreign security policy? So is this gonna backfire? That's the issue. You mentioned also the issue about the too many figures that relate to foreign policy and too many presidents and so on. So I wanted to ask you if isn't this a false problem? I mean, because when we look at the member states, everywhere very often we have a president of the member states, a president of the Council of Ministers or of the government, one or two presidents of the houses of the parliament, the president of the central bank, the president of the constitutional court. This is exactly like the European Union. And nobody complains about the fact that in the member states there are too many presidents. Maybe the issue is that people understand that at the member state there are several institutions and understand what these institutions and the presidents do, while the problem is that at the European level, people are unable to distinguish what are the function of each institution, so they cannot understand why there are so many presidents. Because they don't see, they don't realize that each institution has a different role to play. Also, as you mentioned, the issue of the change of the name for the High Representative. But what do you think about the other change of the name that the Parliament proposed regarding to this overall issue? Because the Parliament proposed to transform the Commission into a European executive. And so they were not brave enough to say that they were turning the Commission into a European government, but they would turn the Commission into a European executive. That anyway should allow citizens to understand a little bit more that the European Commission is essentially the government of the European Union, is the executive. And do you think that this can help with regards to the issue of perceiving what the European institutions really do within the institutional framework? The question regarding, you mentioned the fact that we will never get exclusive competence in foreign and defense policy. And I'm not sure that in the long run, we may not get there, certainly not in the short one. But I would like to ask you a question regarding the theory of federalism. One of the greatest scholars, Ricker, suggested that the federalizing process only succeed when there is an external threat that force the states to join in and create the federation. So for Ricker, centripetal federalizing processes are successful only on defense. So if you don't have a military threat, then you don't manage to convince member states to pull sovereignty. But today, I mean, I think we rather have a military threat in Europe, and there is a lot of debate about it. I mean, now there are member states that are supposed to reach 2% of GDP for military expenditure by NATO. The average of the European Union is 1.6% of GDP for military expenditure. So overall, we are below the 2% threshold. At the same time, even if we all reach the 2% threshold, this would be completely useless. Because today, with 1.6%, the 27 together have the third largest military expenditure in the world after the US and China. We spend 45% of the US with a 10% capacity, which means that over 2/3 of our military expenditure doesn't produce anything at all in terms of security, because we have 27 national defense rather than have one defense like the United States. So we have a multiplication of arms, weapon system, and so on that makes it so expensive and so ineffective that it's unbeatable. So if we reach the 2% threshold, maintaining 27 national defense, this doesn't really change the situation. It means that we will spend 50% of the US instead of 45%, with a capacity of 11% instead of 10%. This doesn't change at all the security situation for Europe. So don't you think that if there was a time in which the issue of integration on defense can go ahead, is this time? I mean, the previous one was in 1950s because we had the Korean War and we were afraid that the same would happen in Germany. But now that we have a war at the border of Europe on a country that we have decided that should join the European Union, because Ukraine is now a candidate country. So maybe, in the literature, at least, one of the most important theory regarding federalizing process would suggest that this is the only time when it is possible. We may not manage. I'm not saying that we'll manage, but at least according to the literature, this is the time in which we could have it a try. Well, for Arion, two questions. The first is if you believe that the European Parliament proposal are fully coherent with the conference one, or if they asked less in some area and maybe more in some others. And the question about the content of the energy union. Because there is a big issue that you mentioned very clearly, the issue of the energy price, the energy security, and so on. But yesterday, Draghi presented to the head of the political groups in the European Parliament and the diplomats of the member states the contour of his report and on European competitiveness. Today, the European Union pays energy twice as much as the US and China. At the apex of the crisis at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we were paying 8 times as much as the US and China. So now we don't have the apex of the crisis anymore, but we are still paying twice as much as the US and China. In the long term, this means the deindustrialization of Europe, because energy is essential to produce and to transport anything. So if you are paying energy twice as much as your competitor, you are done, essentially. You cannot compete in the long run with this condition. So at the same time, why are we paying twice as much of China and the US? Because it's a national competence. Because we don't have the European energy grid. And so if we produce the wind power in the north and solar power in the south, we don't have the grid to move it around on the basis of request, considering that supplies in different periods at the different place. And there was a study by the University College of Dublin, which suggested that if we had the European energy grid, price of energy would be lower by 32%. So we would pay 1/3 less the energy if only we had the energy grid at European level. If we had a European Union strategic reserve, like the United States have, this would also be a great help in terms of crisis. Because nowadays, what did the European Union did? They made the rule that each member state should have their own reserve full at least 80%. But it's a national decision. What is the amount of your reserve? So if the national decision before was that you had no reserve or reserve that were very little, for the European Union, if you have full your reserve at 80%, if this is it's enough for 2 days, 2 weeks, or 2 months, that's up to you. So basically, there was a very, very different situation from member state to member states. And finally, we are competing among ourselves. I think everybody remembers when the war started, the Russian invasion started, that all TV news from each country were showing their foreign minister going with their chief executive officer of the national energy company to Algeria and Mozambique and so on to sign this big contract to import gas from them and not from Russia anymore. And they would make the price. Because, okay, Italy, this is the price. If you don't like it, we'll sell it to the Germans that are coming tomorrow. Sure. But the pipelines from Algeria and Mozambique and so on to export gas, they only come to Europe. So if we had sent Miss Simpson, the energy commissioner for Europe, to buy the gas for the whole of the European Union, which is the largest importer of energy in the world, then we would have a market power because you can sell it to us or to us. So we make the price at that point. Then we would pay the energy like China and the US if we had the energy grid and the common import of the gas rather than competing between ourselves. So when we are discussing about the energy issue, this is the cost of national sovereignty. If you want to keep national sovereignty on energy, well, then you have to be happy that you pay the energy twice as much as your competitor. You could pay the energy as much as your competitors, provided you move the competence and the sovereignty on energy at European level. I think that from this point of view, the proposal of the parliament is actually not good enough because they didn't change that part of the treaty where it says that the competence on the energy mix remains national, which is the key issue. Because if the decision on the energy mix is national, the decision on imports and so on is national. So you cannot use the trade clause and the trade competence of the union like we did for the vaccines, which was, of course, an overstretch of the treaty. But we are in the same situation. If for the vaccine, we didn't have the buying from the European Union, we would have the member states competing towards the big pharma company that were trying to create the vaccines, and we would have that the richest country would got the vaccine before the other countries, paying a lot more of what we paid overall getting the vaccine at the same time, everybody. So we are in the very same situation with energy, just that people don't discuss it and don't realize it. So your opinion on this. And the final one, the final question for you is the Green Deal doomed? Because the Green Deal in the last legislature was the European answer to the request of the citizen. It was the Friday for Future. It was the young people on the streets asking to tackle climate change and so on that produce the Green Deal. If we look at the proposal from the Conference of the Future of Europe, it looks that the citizens continue to want the European Union to focus, to implement, to speed up on the Green Deal. But then you have some minorities, some groups that are very loud with the big rally and the tractor in Brussels and so on that are against, or they ask for compensation to cover the cost of the transition and so on. And it looks that from a political perspective, the environment has changed. Everybody want to come out of the Green Deal or slow it down or take a pause in its implementation. How do you see this regarding the proposal coming out of the conference. And finally, for Federica, a question on double standards. Because it seems to me that when there is the discussion about the democracy, there is a double standards when we discuss about European democracy and national democracy. And listening to the citizen. Because if I compare the decision-making procedure at the European level and at the national level, I think that at the European level is much better, is much more democratic, and is much more responsive to the citizen. Before presenting any legislative proposal, the European Commission is obliged to launch a public hearing. Everybody can send their ideas, proposal, comments about the issue on which the Commission is supposed to present a legislative procedure, to prepare a legislative proposal. So there is this always this open aspect, and there are think tanks, NGOs, enterprise groups, and everybody is sending their opinion. So there is a huge amount of listening and also of gathering knowledge. So when the proposal is made, it's taking into account a lot of different views from all possible kind of stakeholders at European level. Then you have to pass through the parliament, the national governments in the council, taking into account specific interest, national level, and so on and so forth. So it's a process that is long, because you have you have this listening period, then you have the proposal, then the decision. So you have a 2 years period that is necessary in the European Union to take any legislative decision. Then you look at the member states. I know Italy more as I'm Italian, where there is something happens that attracts the attention of the public opinion. The government has to show that is reacting to what happened, whatever it is a killing of somebody in a degraded periphery in a big city and so on. So the following day, there will be a meeting of the government that approve a decree on that issue without any listening, any gathering of information, any gathering of evidence, anything at all. So it's a piece of legislation that has been decided between 24 and 48 hours, that is written very poorly, and that has to be transformed into law by the parliament within 60 days, because it's a decree. Otherwise, it falls down. And usually the parliament ask for a trusting vote on that bill, because otherwise the parliament will not be able to vote on it on time. So the parliament has basically no chance of changing the bill or doing anything. But then everybody says that the issue is that the European Union is far away and is not responsive to the citizens. And frankly, I think that this is a lot to do with lack of knowledge of the possibilities for citizens to influence the decision-making process at the European level, rather than the actual fact that the European Union is not able to respond. The fact that the Green Deal was the response to the Fridays for Future, and that now we are changing on the basis of protests and so on, it shows that the EU is rather responsive. And European Parliament attempt to propose a treaty reform on the basis of the conference proposal as well was a show of taking into account the proposal from the citizen. So your view about this kind of quarrel between European democracy and national democracy, and also, as you mentioned, between the European democracies versus national sovereignty. Because if you take European democracy seriously, you should take into account the conference proposal, and even more the European Parliament proposal. It's the only directly elected institution in the European Union. How can the member states just don't give a damn about what the European Parliament has approved? This is the only directive. Why people should, then people look at the participation in the European election. But if the member states don't care about what the European Parliament proposes, being the only direct elected of the institution of the European Union, why should citizens care to vote? If the member states government show that they don't care and they don't believe in European democracy. So how can we address this issue, Federica? So let me see if there is someone also online so that we can gather all the questions before giving our speaker the floor. I think it's not the case. If there is someone here, yeah, well, it's also late. I understand that people are hungry at this point in time. Okay, so I'll give you the floor in the same order, so we can start with Francisco. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, Roberto, thank you so much for all those challenging questions. First one, quite easy to answer. Yeah, we have a flaw, a constitutional flaw. We should have had, we had this discussion 20 years ago when we were discussing the European Constitution. We should have amendment procedure close to the US Constitution, for instance. Unanimity makes no sense to amend the treaties. It creates the problem that we have right now. So that's basically the issue. And there will be no problem of sovereignty for the states, because if a member states do not like the amendment procedure, do not want to be bound, he could leave according to Article 50. So we have Article 50. We don't need unanimity for the amendment procedure. It's absolutely crazy. It wouldn't change the nature of the EU as it did in the US Constitution. It didn't. It didn't. Of course, member states in the US had to actually ratify the Constitution to become part of the Union, like we did, and we need to. Every time we have an accession procedure, there we need to have unanimity because we are enlarging the number of people inside the European Union. But actually, to amend the procedure, we cannot have unanimity because it basically leads to the situation where we are right now, and we are no longer 6 member states, we are 27. So this makes no sense. Even in the US, they have the problem right now is that, of course, they have a very rigid procedure to amend the Constitution. It's blocked, but now they're states. It's a different problem. We are not a state, so and even international law, most treaties don't need unanimity to be changed. They could be changed by a simple majority. So this makes absolutely no sense. Regarding the existence of the Defense Commissioner, it's a political stunt, like the Housing Commissioner. Of course, we are talking so much about defense and housing that it makes sense that the Commission reflects what the public opinion is worried about. So I understand why they do it, but it creates some expectations that will not be fulfilled by the European Commission. I don't agree with your third observation regarding the fact that we don't longer have 2 presidencies, we only have 1, and people are used to that in the member states. Listen, no one, I think, in the European Union has any doubts about the role of Metsola being the president of the European Parliament. People know because they have parliaments. The problem here is especially in the external relations, is that we have 2 heads. And the American telephone metaphor was always there. Who do I call? And we still have 2 people here, and actually having 1, it makes a lot of difference. I do think, and having only one president of the European Union would be, and we had that discussion right now, even in my country, because we have the new president of the council, and people realize that he exists, and they thought this is really important, although they never heard about Michel in the last few years. So I do think that's interesting, and I also think it's interesting that they changed the name of the European Commission to the European Executive, because that's the executive branch, although it will create some problems in the sense that we will still have in the European Union a dual executive, because the Council will still have executive powers in the member states. So although calling it executive or government, I think it's synonym. I think so. I don't think it's a bad. Probably here it will create some problems with the specific names, as we already have when we call regulations laws and everything. So this is something that we are used to. It. I do agree that calling it the executive maybe not the best solution. And finally, and your most interesting and theoretical question regarding the fact that we have this external threat. So this is the moment to go forward with a defense union and an European army. But here, I think I tried to touch that in my presentation. We do have a problem, a huge problem. And because the problem is the US, basically. What kind of a relation do you want to the US? Because basically they're telling us right now you have to pay for your own defense, because we will not do that any longer. And Europeans were happy with that deal. Since you talk about the 50s, we were going to have an European army because the Americans told us to do that because they couldn't bring GIs in time. They said everything. They called the shots regarding defense, and we were very happy about that. No one wants to serve with the member
Except
states,
the French.
except for different reasons, and we know that the goal, what his positions on all of these things were throughout the time. But my point here is more problematic because we were discussing 10 years ago the TTIP. So more entanglement between the US and European Union in the economic field. So if that happened, then our defense cooperation made every sense because we're getting more integrated. But what we see on the other side of the Atlantic are these nativist platforms in what regards external trade, which makes the Americans a competition to us in the economic field. So is that going to have any reflection in the security and defense fields? I think it has, because if you talk to any American, they are talking about their rivalry with China and the need to go to the Indo-Pacific, and that's their priority, and that's fine. That's their decision. For us here in Europe, this is of course a threat that we need to tackle with. But you talk a lot about numbers that we spend on defense, but every number that you mentioned is related by the commitments of some member states towards NATO. Do you saw what Ireland and Austria actually spend on defense? It's not 1.3, it's like 0.6 because they're not in NATO. So even those numbers are the numbers basically the Americans force us to actually spend, because if we wanted to spend, we would spend much less. So we wouldn't be the third, we will be the fifth or sixth, because this was never a concern for us. So I really think this is basically the most relevant issue that we need to tackle, but we need to decide what we want. And I was talking about my home country, Portugal, because honestly, I do think that we have to call the people to tell and ask the people whether or not they want to be an Atlantic or an European country at some point. Because at some point, it will not be possible to have the best of both worlds, with this actually disentanglement with the United States and with our European brother states. So there will have to be at some point a decision, and for us it will be extremely problematic given that the UK is out, and they are also a very specific country here. So there all of these questions that they need to be answered also regarding the UK position inside the EU, and so it's a hugely complex question that I don't think we have clear answers right now. But the simple fact that we have the threat, I agree with you. Of course, we are only going forward with European integration if we have the threat. That's where states decide have no option other than actually cede more sovereignty, because there is no option. Otherwise, they will never do it. That has been like that throughout the whole idea of European, unless there is this European people that actually force them to do that, which is not also in the horizon. So thank you so much for all the questions, really challenging ones, but I think I covered most of them.
Thank you so much, Francisco. So call Erion for his reply.
Okay. Thank you, Roberto, for the questions. So the first one, the coherence between the European Parliament conclusions and proposals and the Conference for Europe conclusions. Maybe they are not in the same line. Maybe the Parliament has been a little bit realistic, while from one side asking or calling for an energy union, from the other side not delegating exclusively the competencies on the energy and the climate change to the European Union, to the new European Union after the convention. I find it pretty realistic, and maybe if the creation of the energy union will be brought to the end, to the positive end, I think the goals or the achievements proposed by the conference will be realized. and will be met. For what regards the energy union, you said that we still pay twice the price of EU and China. But EU and China are producers of energy, are one of the greatest producers of energy, and they have their own sources of energies, and they have unimaginable reserves of energy. At least I've read somewhere that the United States have 10 years of oil energy resources in the hinterland, and China the same. And they are also making great deals with other countries on which European Union has some policy of human rights conditionality. So you cannot make trade with them, you cannot buy and sell with them unless they do not respect human rights. So this is a problem. This is the original sin of the European Union, as Francisco said. What is the European Union? It wants to behave as a federal state, but it is a sui generis or a particular international organization with some competencies exclusively assigned to states, still remaining to member states, and other important competencies assigned to the European Union without counting the concurrent ones. So you still pay the double, but compared to when you used to pay 10 times the energy before the crisis, I think this is a good starting point in order to unify the energy issue within the European Union. You start from this point. You also mentioned the lack of energy grid network of distribution of energy within the European Union, because we didn't have and we don't have a common policy on energy. So every state, as Norway, for example, which is associated a state to the European Union, has a very, very spread and well-articulated grid of energetic infrastructure, because they are an important producer and exporter of energy. In the European Union, some states produce great part of the energy by the nuclear one, and other states were, most of them were the eastern countries and southern countries, were tied to Russia or to African countries, to the Libya of Gaddafi before, and to the Russia of Putin before and now. So that's why they are reluctant to tie up to cut up the ties with Russia. For example, Orban is not a Russian, and he is not founding the reasons of Putin, but he is doing the interest of his citizens. But in the moment you live within the European Union, you have to think in a common sense, under a common logic of energy policy. And since, for example, Orban or other countries see that we don't have this common policy in energy, they will find their own ways to ensure the furnitures on oil and gas. So you said we have the increase of price in the European Union. This is true, but you have to divide it, to separate it in each country. So in Portugal or in Malta or in Cyprus, they won't pay the same price Germans would like to pay, or Nordics would like to pay, Swedish and Danish, because their GDP and their economic standards would not permit the price Germany and France would pay for the gas. And we are not talking about Eastern countries, which had ties and connections with Ukraine before, with Russia and with Belarus and with other countries, which produced very, very cheap energy due to nuclear power plants. The situation has changed after mostly after the energetic crisis, but also after the Ukrainian crisis. So Putin decided to cut off all the ties, all the furnitures of energy with European countries, which condemned the invasion of, and also the incident of the Nord Stream, which was one of the most important pipelines, gas lines coming from Russia to Northern Europe. For Germany, it was a guarantee for the next 100 years, for next century of cheap energy. So why should we think that these countries would put in common the energy policy when they do not pay the same price of who offers alternative energy as the US? The question is, the US is paying at a certain price and says, okay, you cut off your ties with furnitures with Eastern and buy the energy where I do buy, but you buy it at a double price. And this is not fair. This is the dilemma Francisco mentioned of Portugal, Atlantic or European Union belonging. Okay? And the third one is the Green Deal. The Green Deal, this is the other internal dilemma. You want a Green Deal, you want a prohibition in 2035 or 2040 of the thermic engines and automobiles in Europe, but you don't have the infrastructure of this grid of networks to support renewable energy, electric automobiles. You don't have. And surveys and studies and researches, you better know than me, have showed that it is not the 80% of the 75% of the energy produced is not renewable. So the original source of energy, of electrical energy, we use for the cars, for the automobiles, is not renewable, is not natural. It's produced from carbon-based or from polluting power plants.
We reached 50% last month
50% in Europe or in Italy?
in Europe.
In Europe, okay. 50%. That's why we have some resistance from farmers, from industrials, and from others, because they are not ready, and they couldn't never compete with Chinese producers and with South American farmers and with African farmers or Chinese farmers with the same prices in the same market, since they use old, between parentheses, energy and not renewable energies. They have a lower cost. In Europe, it is imposed to the citizens, to the farmers, to produce according to the new methods of farming and based on the renewable energy, which does cost a lot. Twice time, you said. Twice time would cost the energy to the farmers.
Yes, but not because it's renewable. The renewable part is the cheapest one.
Yes.
What we are paying so much is because the import we pay of gas and oil, it's much higher. But in fact, the renewable are the cheapest energy that we are producing.
But we produce 50%.
The problem is that
The other
we produce only
50%, it costs a lot.
We have to import gas and oil. That's
So the solution is produce more renewable energy, import less energy from outside, and convert your economic and industrial infrastructure to the new. The EU will be the leader in the world. I'm sure about this, of the new economy of the transition towards the renewable energy. But in this period, we have to face some old problems which originate from this original scene of the European Union, what it should be and what it is really. So I think we gave some answers, some short answers.
Thank you so much, Elion. So we give the floor to Federica for her reply before closing up this session. We'll open up the second one at 3 p.m. also for those that are connected. In the program that was published, there were the links for Zoom for the various sessions, which are different, so you can connect afterwards. So Federica, you have the floor.
Yes, I'll be very short because we are all hungry and because the canteen restaurant here is excellent. Yes, maybe I have double standards about national democracy and European democracy, but this is why I think all of us as pro-European people has to be more and more exigent about European democracy. since we know that the core of the problem solution at a global level could be only at a European level. So national solutions are not effective solutions. So national democracy is no more, so crucial in our life. There was a famous study, survey study in Italy, and it pointed out that citizens trusted a lot the municipality government, so the near center of power. They didn't trust at all national governments, and then they trusted again much more the EU. So the most, the nearest level and the farthest in a way, because actually it is obvious how you can imagine to impact the decision of your municipality. You can, impact it in a very easy way. And that's true also at a European level. It is very common to write an email to a member of the European Parliament and get a reply. Do you want to come to a conference at a high school? Yes, of course, I have my agenda free for that day. It is much more difficult to do it with the national parliaments. So it is true that stakeholders are involved in the legislative process at the European Parliament, but it is also true that normal people are not. So democracy is not about only stakeholders' impact. It is also about normal people, life, beliefs, impulses, expectations, problems. So there is something that European institutions have to do to get a stronger link with public opinion, European public opinion. And it is true that according to me, the deliberative experiment was really a wonderful idea, and not to respect that impact will be a deep mistake for the EU institutions, because it was like the chance to say, it's not true that we are really far from you. It's not true we don't care about what you want about Europe. It's not true that we are not interested in what you want to say. But if the output of the conference will not be taken into account, that will be the message. We do not care. It was a joke. So I think that the consequences in a long term will be very, very disastrous. And I really hope this will not be the case. Then, if we want to talk also about national democracy challenges, in the Italian case is absolutely dramatic, because it is true that the executive power has also basically the legislative power. In Italy, it is really, a constitutional law problem, actually. But I don't know, I do care less in a way. I want to stress about the way we can make European democracy more democratic, instead of focus on how national democracy is less and less democratic. Because my focus is not national democracy. I'm a European citizen, and I want to be exigent at a European level. So I know that the main challenges of the future and of the present day are can be, solved only at a European level. So I want democracy at that level. I know that I have a problem with the school of my daughter. It is a municipality problem. So I want democracy also at the municipality level, because I want to get in touch to the people who are responsible for children education. Of course, that's right. So when I have my problems, I want them to be solved democratically. When I do not see the possibility to have problems solved properly, I mean, yes, okay, democracy is always important. I don't want to say the contrary, but I will focus my attention less.
Sure. And with this high note and hope on European democracy, I hope you all have a nice lunch, and we can meet for the next session at 3 p.m. Thank you so much for all those who follow us online and for those who are here in presence. Thank you so much, and we can conclude this session. Tu devi telefonare a scuola.